I will. Yes. Yeah, it was smart. Good luck with that. I guess I across the country in '68. Wow, look at that. Look at that.
You're so far away now.
Wow. And are we all ready to go?
And we're just waiting for our participants to join us.
Yeah.
This is Owl. Look, we just got this system in my office.
Yeah.
The Owl system. Yeah. I was recognizing the split screen and we have the thing, looks like an owl.
Did you see Lori's cover she crocheted for it? It is actually an owl.
So the other morning on the way up here, I just got an email from our IT person that we have like them on stand and
Yeah.
one got knocked over. They're very fragile.
Oh, okay.
They're like more than you would.
Oh, wow.
So glad there's a crochet.
Does it move and rotate or does it?
On the top, whoever is speaking,
Yeah, the very, I think the very top of it does.
like that
Wow.
semi-circular, yeah.
Inside the black thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see how for us, it'll just split screen.
David, that's my kind of language, quote, inside the black thing.
Well, that was a technical description.
Yeah.
The legal term.
Commissioner Leclerc, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman.
I don't know if you can appreciate how wonderful this new owl thing is for the remote presentation. Does it show up on your screen or?
How many fingers am I holding up?
I don't drink this early in the morning.
Yes, it looks wonderful.
Great.
It's almost like watching Netflix, but not more.
But without all the excitement.
Exactly.
And John Bolton, you're here remotely?
I am, and I'll be moving locations a few times probably during the meeting because we have some issues with places I can be. So you may see some different backgrounds as the meeting progresses.
That's exciting. That'll add some interest.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can get going. And the first item on the agenda is ratification of minutes of the July 24th, 2023 meeting. That's agenda item 1.
So no reason to not make a motion to approve as presented.
Excellent. Is that a motion? Yeah. Okay. Sure. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
Commissioner Marble?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yeah.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. So those meeting minutes are ratified. Item 2 is a request for a waiver of a late filing penalty by We the People PAC. And is there anybody here to address that or?
No, I have been authorized by the PAC to say a few things. If you would like. I'll let Jonathan give the intro and.
Sounds like a deal. Okay. Mr. Wayne?
This is a PAC registered with the commission, and in mid-March, Governor Mills announced there'd be a special election to fill a vacancy in one of the House districts. And the election was scheduled for June 13th. And on April 4th or thereabouts, the PAC made a contribution to the individual who became the Republican nominee, that's Abden Simmons. And the PAC contributed $425 to Mr. Simmons. And under the way the law is written, if a PAC or a party is financially active, if they spend money or receive money with respect to this special election, then they have to file a report 11 days before the election. So it's kind of a conditional report, which is a little unusual for us. That's not the way our reporting schedules usually work. The PAC was required to file its report on June 2nd, which was 11 days before the election, but it did not understand that it needed to file the report, so no report was filed. So the contribution to Mr. Simmons was reported by Mr. Simmons 11 days before the election, but the PAC never reported it until after the election when it filed its regular report in July. So using our normal procedures, this this is a late report from our perspective. The activity was sort of reported by the PAC 45 days late. Preliminary penalty is $1,147. The PAC is asking for a waiver. Our general understanding is that the basis is they just didn't understand that they need to file the report based on this particular transaction, and maybe there's more to the story, but I'm not sure. What we're recommending is a reduction to $400, and our rationale for that is that this is kind of an unusual report that's conditional. The candidate did disclose the contribution on June 3rd, so anyone interested in the special election could have discovered it then. However, this is the fourth late report by this PAC in the last year and a half. And consequently, the percentages for calculating the penalty is already at 6%, and that's a factor in our recommendation too. So we're recommending a reduction to $400.
And did you want to put us in on anything else?
Yes, so I have spoken to the principal officer, Representative Buckingham, and I've also spoken to their attorney, Josh Hardy. They are happy and accept, no, they're not happy. They accept the staff recommendation of $400. I'm also happy to explain if you have any questions about this report and why it came up and the timing of it. This is a bit of an odd scenario. But they were advised by their attorney to accept the $400 application.
Do any commissioners have questions of Ms. Burke or Mr. Lynn? No. Do we have a motion? Yes. Yeah.
Although this is unusual, you did give a lot of notice to people that if they did contribute,
I tried.
they had.
I mean, I certainly have learned from this to the confusion, and you'll also hear from the Star City PAC after this that there was also, it seemed a bit of confusion whether a direct contribution from the PAC to the candidate was a triggering type of transaction to require this report, different than like independent expenditures or spending for campaign materials. So certainly we're going to have another special election coming up here in November in HD 50, I believe. That I will make sure to include in my reminders the specific language that even if you're simply giving a direct contribution, that it triggers the report. So I will update my language from that, but I certainly did try to communicate to everyone.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of notice. Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Leclerc, any questions?
No, thank you.
Do we have a motion?
I'll move that we accept and support the staff recommendation and reduce the penalty to $400.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we can move on to a vote. Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
Commissioner Marble?
Yes.
Commissioner Newton?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. Moving on to agenda item 3, this is a request for waiver of a late filing penalty by the Star City PAC. Is there anybody here representing the Star City PAC? Would you like to come up to the witness table?
Sir, morning.
Morning. And our usual, as you've already seen, our usual procedures to have Mr. Wayne explain from our perspective what's going on, and then we'll hear from you. So, Mr. Wayne.
This is a similar circumstance. The Star City PAC made a contribution on April 10th to Mr. Simmons, same candidate. He reported it, but the PAC did not understand that that required it to file a campaign finance report 11 days before the special election. The deadline was June 2nd. And in this case, there's sort of a contributing factor that Mr. Limley and Ms. Burke had a conversation about possible impact of a law, some other laws that took effect and have since been repealed, and that may have contributed to the PAC's confusion. So the contribution to Mr. Simmons was not reported by the PAC until July. So it was 39, reported by the PAC 39 days late. Preliminary penalty is $370. It's less because this was the PAC's first late filing in the past 18 months, so it was calculated at a rate of 2%. So the starting place for the penalty is $370, and the PAC is requesting a waiver and taking into consideration that the contribution was reported by Mr. Simmons on time, and this is in a sort of a conditional report that is not, people may be unfamiliar with. And there was this other conversation with Mr. Lingley, in which advice was given. We recommend reducing it to $200.
Okay, great. Any questions for Mr. Lane from commissioners? Sir, would you please introduce yourself and you can weigh in?
Sure, my name is Zach Langley. I'm a principal at Patriot Consulting Group. I'm a local lobbyist and consultant on a number of these legislative campaigns made for the last decade. Yeah, look, I appreciate all the work that Emma does. I'm trying to be overly communicative and please keep her here durationally.
I think she'll stay as
Yeah.
long as she'll,
Right.
or we'll have her. as long
Yeah,
as she'll
so
stay.
no doubt. Look, this is a situation where mid-session, this popped up. Abden Simmons is a longtime friend of mine. I was first recruited for the legislature in 2014. I called Emma and just said, hey, look, you know, I was checking to make sure I, as a lobbyist, could make a contribution during session without, as a principal officer of the PAC. And said, look, this is what we're planning to do. I'm just looking to send the check. We're not gonna do IEs, any of that. And I guess in my mind said, okay, great. We're not, you know, I saw the additional communications. I will admit, I did not read them thoroughly. And in my mind, I thought, well, this isn't the thing that would trigger a 24-hour, 48-hour additional reporting. So I wouldn't say that this isn't one where I was on vacation and I missed my day or whatever. I made a conscious choice not to report on that date. And if anything, you know, I called them and said, hey, you prefer that I not ask for a waiver, that I will not do that. It will disrupt this relationship at all, because you have been incredibly helpful to me when I have messed up and called, foul on different reports. So if anything, I'd love to not have a black mark on the PAC. But certainly, you know, throw myself at the mercy of the commission and the staff, and appreciate you all being here on a 74-degree August. Wednesday, I guess we're on.
Don't be lonely, Pat.
The only nice day.
Yeah, right.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lingman from commissioners?
No.
Okay, for my part, I understand your confusion, and it sounds like you're very active in communicating with the commission to try to keep things straight, so I appreciate that. Anybody want to make a motion?
I actually do have a question.
Yeah, please.
For staff, Emma or Jonathan. I'm just doing a quick, probably inaccurate math calculation in my head. Wondering why we aren't looking at something in the 125 to 150 range compared to the previous math and the smiling. So there's an answer here somewhere.
Well, Emma's first recommendation was $150, and I thought that I did just a 200 because of the group I wanted to have. I thought it was too big a gap between the last agenda item where we were recommending 400. So if 150 strikes you as more fair, then the staff would be very supportive of that.
I'll make a motion that we reduce it to 150 based on the proportions of the reduction in the initial estimate, if you know what I mean, which I think is comparable for the first.
I'll second that motion. I'm also, you know, the previous issue that had been multiple late filing.
Right.
This is this tax first one.
Right.
So I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any more discussion? I would just like to echo what Commissioner Newman said. I think that the stellar reporting record of this PAC stands out against the previous one, so it fully justifies a smaller fine. Any other, yes,
Just another thing, and I think it's been the commission's practice not to fully waive penalties, even when somebody comes forward and confesses, and it's the first time and raises no particular excuse, and other than they misunderstood the rules. But still, we've always, I think, consistently made some penalty in every case.
that's a really good point. That's true. Any other comments or questions from commissioners?
No.
Okay, so we'll vote. Commissioner Leclerc?
The motion is for the $150 penalty?
It is.
Okay, yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
Commissioner Marvel?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. And thank you for coming in. It's always helpful when somebody comes in and kind of gives us their perspective.
Well, thanks to all the commissioners for your service, and thanks to the staff for always being so friendly.
And we appreciate them immensely.
As a lot.
Okay, item 4 is a request for waiver of late filing penalty from Dan Marin, and that's the one that's withdrawn.
Correct.
Moving on to agenda item 5, request for waiver of late filing penalty from lobbyist Josh McClenny. Is there anybody here with regard to this item?
I'm here virtually if the commission can hear me.
Oh, I can hear you very well.
Thank you very much.
And would you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Josh McClenny. I'm a state policy associate and lobbyist for the Appliance Standards Awareness Project. Our organization is based in DC, but I actually live in North Carolina. So I'm joining y'all virtually today.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Our normal procedure here is that we'll hear from the director, Mr. Wayne, who will tell us about the kind of factual background to the complaint. And then we'll give you a chance to address us, and then we'll make a decision.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Wayne?
Sure. Mr. McClenny, like all lobbyists, once he registers, he's required to file a monthly report on the 15th day of each month that covers the previous calendar month. So a report was due on June 15th, and I believe I'm correct in saying this might have been his first report ever that he had to file with this office. And so the day before the deadline, he tried to file the report, and instead he filed the short form of the report, which is sort of a simple statement that no lobbying was conducted, which was not accurate. He caught his mistake, contacted Emma, we reversed that. And his intention, according to his email, was that he intended to file the correct report later that day, which would have been one day before the deadline. But he's making, it wasn't successfully filed, and he's making the inference that he clicked on another button, such as a save button or something like that, and didn't complete the process. He can speak to that better than I can. Emma went on vacation, he went on vacation, so the correct report was not filed until 7 days after the deadline. And the preliminary penalty is $100, which is covers, which is a penalty up to a month late, it's $100. And the staff recommendation was not to recommend a reduction because $100 doesn't seem disproportionate to the violation. But I did want to add that with respect to candidates who have intended to file a report but didn't complete the process, there has been a past practice of when the penalties have gotten very high, like way into the hundreds of dollars, to recognize that this was a well-intentioned person, but they didn't complete the process. And so in those cases, there have been some reductions some of the time. So I don't know if you want to translate that to here, but we're recommending $100, but we leave it in your discretion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners for Mr. Wayne? All right, Mr. McClenny, would you care to address us?
Absolutely. Hello, I appreciate the commission's time and attention on these issues. Also, really quickly, just want to say I appreciate Emma Burke, who's been incredibly communicative and helpful throughout this entire process. As stated, this past June, I attempted to file my lobbyist hours. It's the first time I've had to file hours in the state of Maine. That was the only time, or the first time other than registering, that I'd used the Maine lobbyist website. I accidentally submitted a short form as was detailed, emailed Emma to return that form. and then promptly filled out the correct form. Unfortunately, that form was never submitted by what I assume was just a personal error and through no ill intent, either hitting the wrong button or having an unstable internet connection on my end. I'm not entirely sure, but it didn't get submitted, and that is entirely on me. I was sadly on vacation and not able to check email until I returned on June 22nd, at which time I saw emails alerting me to my mistake and I resolved the issue. I apologize to the commission for this mistake and for taking your time. Again, this is fully on me. I hope you'll view this as an honest mistake that had no ill intent. This is my first report in the state of Maine. I filed lobbyist reports before in other states and know that I need to be on the lookout for a confirmation email. This is a personal mistake that I hope won't reflect poorly on my organization. And the organization that I work for instills a large amount of trust in me, and I failed to meet their expectations here. So I apologize. I appreciate Bill's time and attention to this matter, and completely understand if no reduction in that charge is on the table today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation. That was open and honest and complete. And I think it actually, the fact that you're here and that you have stood up to your mistake reflects very well on you and on your organization. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Any motions?
I'll move to waive the penalty to $50.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the penalty is waived and reduced to $50. Is there any discussion?
I have just a couple of questions, maybe.
Please.
So this is probably for Mr. Wayne. Is there any record of us ever just not imposing a penalty in a case like this?
I'm sorry that I don't, we've been at it for so many years, and a few of these pop up every year. I just don't have a perfect recall. It's very possible that there could have been in the campaign finance situation involving candidates. It's possible that a complete waiver has been granted. But like Commissioner Hastings said, in a lot of cases, the commission assesses some penalty in order to demonstrate in campaign finance situations that some report has to be filed, and also that there's sort of an education process here, which is that after a lobbyist or a candidate files a report, there's there's sort of different confirmations. There's a message on the screen, there's an email, and a penalty may help reinforce that all of our filers need to look for that kind of confirmation. Just like all of us, when we make an online transaction or something, we look to see if there's a confirmation that the process was completed. We want to encourage that. So I think that's part of the thought process too.
Okay, so it would be very unusual to you don't recall anything. So that answers my question, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Did you have another question, Commissioner Leclerc?
No, I don't.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, we have a motion on the table. It's been moved and seconded that the penalty is reduced to $50. We'll take a vote. Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
Commissioner Martin? Yes. Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
And I'll also vote yes. And thank you again for your appearing and for your helpful explanation.
Of course, and I appreciate the commission, and again, appreciate all of the miscommunication on this matter.
And I think we need to rename Emma as the communicative and helpful Emma. Terrific, thank you. And we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the audits of the 2022 Maine Clean Election Act candidates. And I think you're here to talk to us about that?
Yes.
Great, please come up to the witness table.
Thank you for having me.
Just before you start,
Sure.
Jonathan, was there anything you wanted to say as a preface or?
Well, just because part of the memo was missing. I wanted to underscore that we randomly select 20% of the candidates who are running for the legislature and who are funded by the Maine Clean Election Act program for audits. That's because more than $4 million are paid to these legislative candidates every election year. So we think an audit helps promote attentiveness and compliance to our requirements. And the firm is selected through a competitive process, and Ms. Connors is here on behalf of Brennan, Kirsten, and Willette, who's the firm that conducted the audience this year and the past 2 election years. The only comment other comment I wanted to share was that this year's audits are mostly done, and they are again showing a very high rate of compliance by the main election candidates. The auditors are finding some minor errors with reporting or record keeping, which could happen to any of us when we're balancing our checkbook and that kind of thing. So I think that's all I wanted to say, is that it's very promising. It's, you know, when we receive campaign finance reports, we look at them on the face to see if they seem to be complete. But you never know what's under the hood unless you look at the bank account statements and the invoices and so forth. And once they do that, we have a better picture. And the candidates who opt into this program are very compliant. We truly believe in it. So that's good.
That's great. Yeah. Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Wayne before we go on? Okay, ma'am, please introduce yourself and let us know how this audit went.
Okay, thanks. I'm Jennifer Connors from Running Kirsten Olet. And I have been involved with the prior reviews that we've done for the clean election campaigns. As Mr. Wayne said, we are pretty far along in the process. There are a few stragglers. At this time, we have issued 24 reports that are final. We have 3 more final reports that have been drafted, but they're in the review process. We have 5 reports that have been issued as drafts, and we're currently waiting for responses from the candidates. And then once we hit that date, whether they give us a response or not, we will issue a final report. So those will go out. And then the remainders are in various stages. We're either still in the process of trying to get some additional information from the candidates, or they're in the review process itself. So overall, as Mr. Wayne said, a lot of the testing that we have done so far has been fairly clean. There are some exceptions. What we call exceptions are just basically minor reporting errors. Number one error that we see would be candidates basically reporting items on the wrong report. Typically, they will report expenditures as of the date that it actually is paid, or as of the date that it clears the bank statement, when they are supposed to report those transactions at the earliest time that transaction was initiated, either when they had an agreement in place, or they put in an order or something like that. In that case, they are required to report the transactions as an unpaid debt or obligation. There are still quite a few candidates that miss that, but overall, we don't really consider that to be a significant issue. It's just a timing issue, but we still include it in our reports. I did want to step back a little bit and talk a little bit about our process. It's been a couple of years since I've been here, so I don't remember if all of you were on the. No, okay.
I remember.
Yeah. You do, okay. Just to kind of give you an overview of what we do. So we actually started our process a little bit earlier this year, which was the commission's idea. And actually, I think that worked out well. We typically wait until after December, because the candidates don't have their final bank statement, their campaign bank statement. So we typically have to wait for that. This year, we started the process earlier. We asked for the backup documentation in December, and we did still have to reach out and get additional information after the fact. Typically, we were missing the December bank statement. But it did help getting the information earlier because it started the testing process earlier. And at the beginning, what we usually do is we get a list of the candidates. The commission does go through and they take out any candidate that has been tested in the last 2 cycles, which as long as they didn't have any significant issues. If they've been tested in the last 2 cycles, then they were removed from the list. We then actually use a random number generator. We assign each candidate a number, and then that's how we pick them. It is completely random. We then send the letters out to the candidates requesting the information. We also do selections of their expenditures. We select up to 50% of their total expenditures just to get a good representation of what they spend money on. And so we select the invoices, we provide the list of invoices for them to send to us, along with a request for supporting documentation for seed money contributions, and all of their campaign bank statements. And then we also ask for any additional information, such as if they had equipment that they purchased during the campaign and then they sold it back, and then provided that money back to the commission, those types of things. I think that pretty much covers it. Is there anything that you want to add to that, or?
No, other than there will be future updates as they close out the remaining ones. There could be some findings, but in the ones coming up that I'm aware of, but they're not. That doesn't mean they're serious findings. It just means they're moderately more significant, so they're labeled as findings rather than exceptions.
Yep.
So,
How was compliance with your records requests?
Overall, they're pretty good. Most candidates, I would say probably 3/4 of the candidates got us the information by the requested date. And then we had some stragglers. We had to reach out to some candidates because they just forgot. We had some candidates that requested extensions, which we usually grant them additional information so that they would provide the information. And then we have some candidates that they'll provide most of the information, but they misunderstand that they have to provide, for example, all of the bank statements. So we usually have to turn around, reach out to them and request that additional information. So but overall, most of the candidates are pretty good at responding and providing the information.
That's a great.
Mr. Murphy?
Just a reminder, what's the process and when do we notify all candidates that they're possibly subject to this kind of review?
it's in a lot of our educational materials. And then I'm pretty sure it's part of our post-election communications that they could be selected for or not. Maybe it's not, but anyway, it's certainly in most of our educational materials that this is part of the process. At the very least. Some people are surprised and that they're being audited, and there are a few negative reactions. Normal human
I'm
behavior.
not suggesting that a little element of surprise is a bad thing. I'm just curious to.
Some people have lost their election, and they're like, oh my gosh,
Right.
I have to be so responsible, and I'm still getting audited, and I'm not even in office,
Yeah.
there's that kind of reaction to it, which is normal and understandable.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, please.
Does the commission do anything, with this information, for example, I'm thinking we're seeing this issue that seems to be the most common confusion. So is there going to be further information or education about that? What do we do with the audit, I guess?
Well, Jen, do you want to speak to the sort of the comprehensive report that you put together at the end?
Sure. So once we get through all of the reviews, the final reports have been issued for the individual candidates, then we actually do a summary report, which includes basically an overview of, we actually include a table in there of what the exceptions were, what the findings were, what category they fall into. So you kind of get a snapshot of what the overall results of the review are. We do usually include some recommendations. We have included recommendations in the past. Honestly, like I said, this is the #1 issue, and we've discussed this in the past, and I'm not really sure what else you could do. The guidance seems to be fairly clear about when they need to report a transaction, so.
Yeah, I mean, this is the #1 issue that,
Yeah.
and it
keeps coming up.
keeps coming up, and we're sort of at our wits' end in terms of what more we could do. We really try to hammer it home. The commission could adjust its expectation, if it wanted to, adjust its expectations or the legal requirements to match human behavior if you wanted to go down that route, but I don't know that we want to do that, so,
Commissioner Hayes.
You know, having been a candidate and did my own reporting, you report after the fact in any case, and I was probably as guilty as, I'm glad I wasn't audited, because I would tend to just go through my checkbook and look at the date I wrote the check, and I don't remember when it was
Yeah.
ordered or what. Sometimes the orders change and and probably in most cases, I still fell within the right reporting period, I just had the wrong date down. But I gotta believe that for many candidates, that's the way they do it. When you order something, you don't think, well, now I gotta go to the computer and I've gotta enter this in right now as a debt and all that. I would wait until it was time to do the report and then get my checkbook out and. And I think it is a difficult problem. I understand that the ordering is key, but I think for most small campaigns, it's very difficult to keep track of that. And
I remember doing the exact same thing. I did my own bookkeeping and my own reporting. And I think that, does the way we do it with entering into obligations being a reporting date, does that fit with any kind of accounting method or anything? I don't know. I'm not an accountant, so I don't know if that is a standard
For
method.
accounting purposes, no, it usually is reported as of the date that you actually pay something, so.
So that I think is a cause of some of the confusion.
it absolutely is. And I mean, sometimes if you think back to the close examination we gave to the Democratic, the DLCC,
Yeah.
you know, we held them to a very high standard.
Yeah.
And I think that is appropriate because they're a professional campaign organization and you want to make sure things are reported early. But I think with candidates, we're just everyday people. We feel like the right agency response to be very understanding that people, that's just the way that people's mind works and they don't take the time to look at the statutory definition of what is an expenditure. So we're always happy to adjust our guidance for the rules or statute requirements to reflect what you think is fair, but we're just always very understanding of this for candidates.
Sure. Commissioner Hayes.
You know, I could do see the other side of this though. For candidates, it's kind of an innocent thing, but in a big campaign, independent, somebody buying $500,000 of TV ads could game the system by just not paying the bill till after the election, and then the whole purpose of the reporting laws on down the drain. So it is an important thing, especially in those situations. When I was a little guy, I said, leave me alone. But I can see there is a reason for that, and it's a good reason. That's the date. I have on the question. You show no indication, or you seem to have found no indication that any candidates are abusing it by using the money for improper purposes such as personal bills or things like that. Are you finding any of that?
No.
That's very
Anything like
encouraging.
that, so.
That's great.
We do have one report that's coming up with a potential finding, but I'd rather not get into that
Yeah,
until the
sure.
report is finalized.
Sure.
So, I think you probably know which one I'm talking about. Yeah, so.
We've had some issues in the past with people, using it for their cell phones and stuff like that.
We haven't seen anything like that. The candidates this year have also been really good about separating personal funds from campaign funds. I mean, we'll see the occasional something gets deposited into the wrong account and then it goes right back out again, or they paid for something out of the campaign fund, but then they made up for it. So I think most candidates are actually pretty good at catching those. Although I'm not sure if some of them the commission catches and says, hey, you need to fix that. I'm not sure. So, but overall, it's pretty high level of compliance.
Great. I think that's very hard.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Just, so the report we're expecting, within the near future. In the past, are these released to the public, and does the media ever pick up on the compliance, the high level of compliance that, I'm just thinking from the perspective of, it is amazing that you have all these many candidates without experience who do their best efforts to comply, and the staff that does a great job in herding them into compliance gently. And I'm just wondering, I've never noticed it in the press, and I'm just thinking it's a bit of good news. Not saying how this is all going to come out in the end, because the report hasn't been produced, but in the past, has it ever been a matter of public interest?
President's always interested in bad news rather than.
All the cats that didn't get caught in the tree, yeah.
I can't remember. But, excuse me, but we could try this time at the conclusion of the audit to see if we can interest some news on this, because I think there is some skepticism among the public that if the state is paying for people's campaigns, that, oh gosh, anything could happen, and how could the state ever keep track of everything? And so there are good results to try to publicize. So we can try that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be nice.
Into candidates doing their best, so this is good.
Yeah.
Like we do.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I agree.
I would second all of this. Yeah. Good.
All right, any other thoughts from commissioners? Ms. Connors, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your continued work.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 7. We were going to do rulemaking. We're going to start the rulemaking process, but as I looked through this yesterday, last night, or actually the night before, I had some questions particularly about the independent expenditures rules. And I kind of went back and forth with Mr. Wayne a bit, and if it's okay with everybody, we decided to postpone the actual rulemaking until the next meeting. And I asked Mr. Wayne if he could, if he'd be so kind as to kind of do a little primer on independent expenditures, and we could use that for our educational purposes, and then we could maybe have that could spark a discussion of what the rulemaking ought to look like.
It's not only okay, it is appreciated.
And we appreciate the suggestion to hold off for a month. I think that we, as on behalf of staff, we're delighted to have such an engaged set of members on the commission, and we absolutely want you to be supportive of what is initially sent out for public comment. I mean, we wouldn't want to have it any other way. So
That's
thank
great.
you. Yeah. So I circulated by email around 5 p.m. some bullet points, and including to Commissioners Leclerc. I don't know if you had a chance to see them, but they're in the room. They're now at your desk.
And I apologize for kind of the last minute nature, and I really appreciate your rapid, wonderful response.
No problem. It took just an hour to throw it together. So independent expenditure reports are a special report. They're kind of a contingent or a conditional report. Independent expenditures are the costs of communications to voters or mailings or ads or TV or radio ads or digital or signs that advocate for the election or defeat of a candidate. So if there is a PAC or a party or just a regular person or some unregistered group that engages in those kinds of communications and they cost money and they cost more than $250 per candidate, then they're required to file an independent expenditure report with us. And so for PACs and parties, this is apart from their regular reports. This is something that's more accelerated and provides some more immediate information. What's in the report? The spender has to specify the amount that is spent to support or oppose each candidate. and the amounts that are paid to the different vendors. So if I could refer your attention to the next few pages of the handout, that's an actual report that was filed with our office the day, well, shortly before the general election last year by the House Republican Fund. And in this particular example, these are radio ads that advocate for candidates, for about 7 candidates. So if you look at the first schedule of transactions, that's an itemization of exactly how much was spent by the House Republican Fund to support each candidate. So you get, first of all, the one thing I want to draw your attention to is that the PAC is actually saying, we supported this candidate. That's the second column. Here's the date of the expenditure. Here's who the candidate is. Here's the payee, and here's the amount that was spent to support that candidate. And then the next schedule is sort of a comprehensive amount that was paid to this particular vendor. So that's what the report looks like. The other element of the report is a statement that the expenditure was made independently of the candidates in the race. That's why it's called an independent expenditure. And so the critical difference there is that if, say I'm a PAC, I'm spending money to support a candidate. If I do it in connection or in consultation with the candidate, they've requested it or I coordinate, that's actually an in-kind contribution to the candidate, and that's subject to a limit, and then the candidate has to report it. So,
Or it's forbidden in the case of
Oh, yeah.
an election.
absolutely, yeah. So, thank you. So this is an indication that the PAC or the party or whoever was acting completely independently of the candidate and their political committee. And it's not a contribution to them. And I think that's partly over some decades why the states have adopted this because of that. They just want to know it's independent. So the transactional information is entered into our electronic filing system. And in the past, the law up to last election year, the law actually required an affidavit, a paper affidavit be filed with our office on behalf of the PAC or the party or the spender saying it was independent. But part of the commission's legislation that was accepted by the legislature was now we're moving to an online process where they make that kind of affirmation online. And that way they don't have to make a paper filing with us at all. And just seems the efficiency benefits are worth it. In the last 60 days before the election, they have to be filed very quickly after the date of the expenditure. And again, the expenditure date can sometimes include when the PAC or the party commits to paying. It's not necessarily when they write the check. It's we're ordering this communication from the mail house. That is the date that the law requires them to view the expenditure date, and they have to file the report within 1 or 2 calendar days after that. My own personal view, which I jotted down in the bullet points, is I think it's these deadlines of 1 or 2 calendar days. They're very quick. I mean, the PAC, they really have to be on their toes and they have to file really quick. And I think that it is helpful to get the information to the public very quickly. But my own personal opinion after doing it for a number of years is you also have to think about the actual PACs and parties that have to do this. And it actually does cause some stress and some anxiety that they're engaging in their First Amendment rights to try to convince voters to vote for or against the candidate. And then very next day they have to file a report. I think that's really, personally, I found that to be sort of a stringent deadline, and this is within the commission's control. So I'm not suggesting we loosen this up now, but that's just my personal opinion, is it doesn't have to be this fast. But that's just, one person's personal view. Yeah.
To that end, do you have any sense of what other state commissions require, with respect to their turnarounds, or
We can look at a selection of 10 states and get back to the commission on
Yeah,
that.
I'd be curious to know that information to see if we're out there on that or just what's feasible.
I'm not as concerned about the deadline, really, because most of these independent expenditures are made by the House Democratic Committee, the Senate Republican Committee. And they're in the business of doing independent expenditures. They know the rules inside and out. And those committees have always frustrated me. Because if the purpose of the Clean Election Act was to get money out of politics, it didn't work. Because those committees accumulate huge, I mean, relatively, many hundreds of thousands of dollars each election cycle, which they then pour into selected campaigns with independent expenditures. And they know exactly what the rules are. That's what they do for a living, essentially. So
Yeah, I'm not saying we change it, I still
but that's,
appreciate it.
I don't know, I suppose there are other committees that make occasional independent expenditures that are less versed in the rules, but,
Well, and at the other end of the spectrum, didn't we have a case
Yes.
or two within the last year or so?
Yeah.
Of a member of the public who bought some signs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Who was kind of roped into this completely unknowingly. So it has a fairly broad swath.
I think on our educational part of our website, we have some PDFs of around 8 individuals who filed independent expenditure reports. So, it does, there is a range.
Yeah.
I do think in terms of whether our filing deadlines are typical, I think our department compared to other states would put some much higher priority on this idea that the debt, when you like, as we saw with the GLCC, we don't really know what goes on behind the scenes, but when something comes to our attention, we do try to hold them to the expectation that making a contract or entering into an agreement to pay for a communication starts the clock ticking. And just my hunch is based on my interactions with other state officials and others who do this in other states is that they may not be as exacting on that as our staff is. And maybe that's because we're a small state and I don't know, but that's just food for thought is that
And I'm gonna be okay, I'm just saying, I'd like to get the information, I mean, I like that we have exacting rules in our states, it shows the priorities of the commission, but I'm so be curious in the information while we're discussing it.
and didn't we kind of address the other problem that in this last paragraph about whether or not an expenditure is direct advocacy for an election? And you could, the spender could, apply to the commission for a ruling that it wasn't
Right.
direct advocacy for an election. But the money was already spent before we ever took it up. They didn't have any other choice. I mean, if they waited for us to make a ruling, the election would be over. So didn't we kind of say that the staff could make a determination without our involvement so that would be resolved ahead of the, right away, very quickly?
yes, and that became part of the commission's legislation, and that's now in statute that we or I will make the initial determination, and then anybody who disagrees with that can appeal it to the commission.
Right.
That was a good.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Obviously, I think. it's good.
And the other thing I would highlight along those lines is the legislature did approve sort of a slightly different test that all of you participated in drafting the legislation, which was the test now is that communication naming a candidate after Labor Day is sent out to the public in that time period. An IE report is required unless the spender demonstrates that the cost was not incurred with a purpose of or had the effect of influencing the election. And so that's now part of what I would have to determine or what you would have to determine. And I just wanted.
We spent a lot of time on that one.
That was
Yeah.
smart.
I appreciate it. I think that was a good improvement. I just wanted to, since you might want to have a policy discussion about the rules, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple examples of how the commission made this determination last year to jog your memory. Sometimes a candidate, so on page 5 of the handout, there's the last frame of a TV ad that features Governor Mills. So for some reason, we got more of these requests for the determinations in 2022 than we've ever had before. We always encourage them to happen ahead of time, and some of them did submit them ahead of time, which was terrific.
Yeah.
So in the case of the one regarding Governor Mills, this happened in the last 3 weeks before the primary election. And there was sort of a public relations campaign to talk about how important it was to relicense the Shawmut Dam. And Governor Mills was specified in this TV ad. There was sort of a message to her as a policymaker. And my observation of your decision was that you felt very clearly that this was not intended to influence the primary election. She actually didn't even have a primary opponent, I believe. So that was an easy call. So as a now a decider, I'll be really happy if they're all this.
Yeah.
But then we had one from the support term limits. I forget US term limits organization. And those I thought were kind of, my first observation was that those were harder calls.
Yeah.
Because this one actually kind of tipped the scales for me personally, because it says career politicians need to be sent home. So like that, it's kind of an election inferences there, but some of these can be framed in such a way that it's a harder decision.
Sure.
So I think they will range in the future as you look at the rules. Like sometimes somebody like the Shawmut Dam advocates, they're convinced that they are not trying to support or oppose anybody in an election. That's what they really believe. And some people will really believe they shouldn't have to file a report. Other people may, after they get an adverse decision, the commission will acknowledge they should have filed a report and try to file it. So there's a range of different situations that the rule will have to address. Thank you. That's all I wanted to give you as background.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been extremely helpful. Any thoughts or questions or comments? Commissioner Clara, I don't want to ignore you. You're muted.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks. Excellent. So if nobody objects, can we go on a little bit to the proposed rules?
Yeah.
And here's what kind of made me a little uncomfortable with the proposed rules is that they set up a mechanism for someone who thinks that they're not making an independent expenditure, who thinks themselves that they're not making an independent expenditure, to request after they've made the expenditure. And it's not clear what the deadline is, but to request an opinion from the director about whether it's an independent expenditure or not. And it doesn't seem to me that that's always going to be able to be done within the 1 or 2 day window when the reporting is supposed to be made. And it also allows them to then appeal the director's decision to the commission, and I can guarantee that's not going to be within the 1 or 2 days. So I think we've got the potential for somebody who thinks they're not making an independent expenditure to, but if it's questionable, to make the expenditure and then request the ruling from the director and not have it be reported to the public and to the opposing candidate in a timely way. And I think that's a problem. I think that kind of subverts the whole intention of this whole scheme.
You're looking at paragraph 5, sorry,
Yeah, yes. And maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I was thinking the way around that is to kind of require some kind of a provisional report of an independent expenditure. And if a person has a question and is going to request a ruling of the director, they still have to report it. And then we have maybe some mechanism for, if it's ruled not an independent expenditure, for removing that report. But it troubles me that somebody can use a process like this to avoid making a timely report of what arguably is an independent expenditure. And maybe I've got it wrong.
No, I'm happy to comment on the timing.
Yeah.
And also on the idea of a provisional report. So the one thing that is out of our hand, because it's in the statute, is at the very latest, they have to ask this kind of determination within 7 days of the expenditure, is it, then 7 days of disseminating the communication. So that's in the statute. So they send out the communication within 7 days if they believe no IE report is required, they have to make a request. And still, I know, I hear what you're saying, that they could still drag it out.
Right, that's already
It's
past the filing deadline.
Yes, it is, yeah. We could add to the rule to address the concern, like, right now, there is no time period in our rules for how quickly they have to appeal, so they could take their sweet time.
Right. It seems to allow,
Yeah.
months if that's what they want.
So they've already made the determination from us, they get the unsatisfactory determination. We could require an appeal within whatever you think is reasonable, 5 days. I mean, they've already made the request. I guess they would be finding fault with the staff determination. They would need a little time to prepare that. So you could add that into the rule. And then the rule is written, so they had sort of a presumptive kind of grace period of 1 week. They have to file the independent expense report. If they get an adverse decision and they file the IE report within 1 week of my determination or your determination, it's considered on time. It doesn't have to be a full week. I mean, you could require them to file more quickly.
Well, but the case is, these independent expenditures are most aggravating to candidates if they happen in the last 3 days or so of the campaign. All of a sudden, there's this big blitz on TV against them or something. And, if they can postpone making any report to the public at all, for weeks or months, it kind of subverts the whole process. And honestly, I mean, I'm generally an optimist about the people and their objectives and their intentions. But I think you can, if you set up this kind of a system, you can almost guarantee that 90% of independent expenditures are going to go through the process of requesting a determination of you and then appealing it to the commission.
Well, the idea that the initial determination is made by me is now in statute, so
Yep.
we can't, unless we change the
Right, well, I
statute,
think that's great.
we can't, well. So I think the comment I'd make on the provisional report, and I might just want to flag this as something that our council might have comments on.
I was hoping you'd listen.
Is that, of course you was, they do have a statutory privilege to go through this process in order to be ordered to file a report. So I don't know if we went through a rulemaking could require them. I just don't know. Could we require them to file a provisional report? We don't tend to get provisional reports filed with us in general. Not to say you couldn't. I do think that there are some people like the Shaman Dam folks who would be resistant for what it's worth, because they truly believe they're not trying to support or oppose anybody. So for our rules to require them to file just even a provisional report where they have to go on the record saying that they either supported or opposed Janet Mills because of this licensing message, they might object to that for what it's worth. Because they, in their heart of hearts, they think we're not kind of supporting, but we don't want to put down on them. And it could violate corporate bylaws or nonprofit rules. So those are all the considerations why it might not be the route to go.
Well, maybe there's a mechanism for putting the risk of an adverse decision on the filer, on the person who's asking for the determination. At the moment, there's no penalty at all for asking for your decision and getting an adverse decision. And the benefit is that it gets put off weeks or months.
Absolutely, I'm not resistant to that at all. I just remember hearing from some of the commissioners, like, and I keep going back to the Shaman Dam example, it's an innocent case.
Yeah.
That there was a feeling like in those situations, there presumptively should not be any kind of negative outcome.
Yep.
Because they were acting in good faith. And so I'm whatever disincentive you want to create
Yeah,
the
sure.
rules to
And I'm just throwing things, I'm just ruminating. Mr. Bolton, any thoughts?
Sure. I think the issue of whether we could require the a provisional report by rule is something I'd want to look at a little more carefully before I offered sort of an off the cuff kind of reaction. I think the commission generally has fairly broad rulemaking authority, so it may well fall within that, but I guess I'd like the ability to kind of look through the different sources of rulemaking authority and get back to you on that. The one thing that I think is worth keeping in mind is that these independent expenditure requirements are anytime you're requiring disclosure of political activities, you're running up against First Amendment concerns. And so one of the things I think in the rulemaking process, just to be sort of thinking about is the risk of litigation and the way the First Amendment might interact with these rules. And basically what the test is that courts look at whether campaign finance disclosure requirements, they subject them to what's called exacting scrutiny, which is where government has to have an important interest. There has to be a substantial relation to that interest. And recently the Supreme Court's clarified that there has to be narrow tailoring, where the means are narrowly tailored to the ends. And so the one thing to think through, and I'm certainly not suggesting it would be unconstitutional, but just something to think through with a provisional report is kind of alluding back to what Mr. Wayne was saying, that you could have, if a group is on the correct side of the line, they're not actually making an independent expenditure, and if they have to file a provisional report, you're basically requiring them to disclose something that they might prefer not to disclose, where in fact under the law they wouldn't be required to disclose it once the determination is made. So again, it's just something to keep in mind. And I think there is, obviously, you can certainly articulate the reasons why there'd be a governmental interest in requiring some kind of provisional disclosure, but imagine a group like Mr. Wayne was talking about would feel you're basically making us do the thing we don't want to do, on which sort of you can't fully take back, right? When once something's been made public, you can't make it unpublic entirely. So those are just some considerations to think through.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe we have to think about all this, but maybe including an appeal deadline is the way to deal with that, because then you're not making folks do a presumptive, expenditure report that for something they don't think needs to be done, but you're limiting the time for appeal. So certainly for expenditures close to elections, it could be afterwards, after the fact, right? There's no way to not avoid that, but you can also see how many people actually do that, or maybe something to think about. Maybe that's the place to draw the line, where we're narrowly tailoring the issue so it gets to the public quicker without infringing on rights of the PACs.
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Don't mind a bit.
Okay, just as the person who will be, lovingly enforcing this. So the majority of people, I do think, will come to this requesting a determination that something's not naive, honestly. And I do think the vast majority of things we will decide on will hopefully be like the Shawmut Dam situation, where it's relatively clear what the intent is. I feel, knowing these filers, that the best way to deter frivolous requests is to have a potential penalty, potential late filing. That could be, however, if you're like, we feel this is naive, but we understand why you requested it, that it's not an automatic as set, perhaps follows a different penalty formula or has different mitigating factors than the penalties we have, how the penalties are formulated right now, which is, as the staff, we have no choice but to give them a preliminary penalty based on the formula and statute. Versus it could be determined more on intent or whether it was frivolous or essentially comes across as you were trying to delay in filing something.
Yeah, and actually, I was just thinking down exactly those same lines. At the proposed rule sets up a blanket, kind of a. It's got an exception, but it kind of sets up a blanket rule for, missing the time limits by dint of using the process. So maybe if it didn't do that, maybe if somebody had made an independent expenditure and requested a determination from the director, and it either went to the commission or not, in the case that it was an independent expenditure, the time that they missed the filing by was not forgiven. That might be, I don't know if I said that very clearly, but.
I think you're saying what I'm thinking. It's something along the lines of, if you encouraging people to make that request ahead of time, to make that determination ahead of time. So if you do make that determination and it's
adverse.
Yeah, to you, then,
You're liable for late filing.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if you don't make, so it encourages some kind of, right, the deadline's later, or you won't get a penalty if you make that decision ahead of time. But if you don't ask for the request, it's adverse. I feel like I'm not saying any more.
Look, the penalty formula is it's multiplied, the percentage of the financial activity is multiplied by the number of days late. So essentially, if someone chooses not to file an IE report, chooses to request a determination, the determination comes out, no, it is an IE. That you can, all of those days are now a part of that penalty.
Yeah.
Which is going to, considering the, obviously how expensive most days are, it's gonna be very hefty.
Yeah.
Preliminary penalty, but I think that's when you can say also if this is adverse, but there's very good reasoning or this, there's sense to why you made the request, that you could essentially waive the number of days up to that point and say the clock starts now, so you need to file within 1 day of now, and if you do not, then you will receive a penalty.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense, because true, otherwise people report that are obviously independent expenditures, they could just request a determination.
Right.
And write that out to give
It-
themselves some
yeah.
extra time, so that makes sense, your decision makes sense if it's.
Yeah, and I do think that, the majority of cases, and I also think it sets up a deterrent effect as well to keep people from dabbling. And maybe we can get away with this request. So that I think may work best with the groups we have.
Mr. Bolden, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this seems like a good approach to me. I think, focusing on, the deterrent effect of I think the idea of deterring sort of frivolous determinations or requests for determinations. I think that's a pretty legally sound way to approach this.
Mr. Wayne, is that?
Absolutely, we can, if it's okay with the commission, we'll take all of this into consideration and
Yeah,
refer with John and we'll come something else for the next meeting.
Is
I
that,
think the language in I is sort of what we're talking about, isn't
is that kind of the sense of the commission? I don't want to be. Commissioner Claire, have you?
So what we're talking about is kind of being able to look and the judge appeals that are filed in bad faith, frivolous appeals.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
As the non-lawyer in that room, I only have two thoughts. I won't pretend that I'm following every nuance of what you're suggesting, but on the one hand, I'm envisioning organizations skilled enough to appear to present information, as in the Shamet Dam situation, in which they're able to line up what is arguably a policy point with a constituent base, which makes the presentation actually more political than it is. And I don't think we should try to set up a system in anticipation of that sort of, situation at all. On the other hand, I'm appreciative of your concern as chair, that the system doesn't get gamed by people clearly aware of where the guardrails are and aren't. And I think that coming at it from the viewpoint of stiffer penalties, I'll put it that way, on people who we could include, are in fact trying to do that, makes more sense to me as somewhat supportive of the system and wanting this to work. So I think that's a good group. I'm glad it came up that way.
Any other thoughts?
If I can just ask about your comfort level with paragraph I, do you still like the idea that the report would presumptively be considered on time? The way it reads now, or is it too generous from your point of view?
I think that's too generous.
Okay, all right.
I think there ought to be, I think if it is determined to be an independent expenditure, I think that that time period should not be waived.
Really?
Yeah.
At all?
Yeah.
That time forward.
Yeah. From the
They
time,
have to make the report that same day,
Within one day.
within one day.
yeah, I mean, that's what we're requiring, anyway, it's within 2 weeks of the election.
But I mean, that would give them then they could request a waiver and you could consider like the intent of the request as part of any penalty waiver.
Yeah, I guess if you're on, I'm just playing that kind of like how practically, so you folks who work practically. Which abuse me of my, is you're making a request for something that you think is on the line, right? That shows the folks you want to be making requests. And so if you think it's on the line, you basically have the report ready to go, just awaiting the determination from the commission. So one calendar day would not be onerous. Is that,
Well, or you could do it in advance. I mean, there's always the potential to request the rule in advance. That's provided for already.
And having a penalty, perhaps looming penalty, I think would also encourage people to make a request earlier. And also filing independent expenditure reports if this is a group that is already registered with us. Filing an independent expenditure report is quite easy. And they could even have a pending the transaction already in there, and all they would have to do is click file, or if it turns out that they don't have to, they can just delete the transaction.
that's what I'm thinking, you're filing it, it's ready to go.
Yeah,
Are we risking unintentionally coming down too hard, the quote little guy? Most of our focus is on the organization, the quote slick, informed organization that may be trying to be manipulative. But what about those 3 people in the neighborhood who say, we're gonna put out a big sign, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think we can always waive things.
Okay, I just don't want to forget that scenario in this.
Yeah, no, I don't.
I think it's also unlikely that for those type of folks that they would be putting out some type of communication that would be naming or identifying a candidate that that would be for some other purpose other than an independent expenditure, other than trying to encourage people to vote for or against someone. Again, you look at the Shaman Dam situation, this is a very large group with a lot of money.
Right.
There's a big policy position. I'm trying to think of in my head what, a small person, with a small group of people would be putting out, that would be naming and identifying a candidate shortly before an election that would actually
Yeah.
legitimately not be for the election.
Right, usually it's a vote for someone, so don't.
Right.
Yeah, it's
All
someone,
the cases we've had have been
Yeah.
pretty obvious. They would admit they're trying to
Yeah.
beat somebody or get somebody elected.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that helpful or not?
It's very helpful. No, it's-
I'm very cognizant as a lawyer of, getting the statute or these rules and you go, who drafted
Right.
this,
What committee did that?
If there's a problem, I just point at you guys.
What committee designed that element?
How did they not think of this issue, and you're like.
Does that?
No, it's very helpful. I mean, it's hard to
It's
come
a
up with the right
difficult-
procedures to cover different.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
scenarios.
difficult statute and a difficult rule, and it has really tight filing deadlines and,
For
it would.
future historians, we're trying to do the right thing.
That'd be
It's on
ideal.
YouTube. Be there forever.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
It'd be ideal if we can, come up with an answer that preserves the intention of the reporting of independent expenditures, but still provides, the simplified ruling from the director and, did you have some?
Well, I was just yawning. I'm sorry.
So I would
I can
ask,
take a message.
so I would ask, where do we go procedurally from here? We've given arguably new direction to staff. And also at the same time, do we have anything to review other than IEs that was in the original document?
I would propose that we float the rulemaking for a month. And then in that time, I'll work with Mr. Wayne and anybody else who's interested in one and two can contribute and we'll hopefully come up with something. Yeah.
I appreciate the time we spend on independent expenditures because, once again, I think of it from a candidate's perspective. Knowing that somebody has put a lot of money into your opponent's campaign is extremely important to know. Knowing that very quickly is extremely important to know because you realize then that the other side thinks that you're vulnerable. That was one of the biggest pieces of, when I was running, that would really get me all excited to find out that they put money against me. Geez, I guess I gotta work a little harder, that kind of stuff.
Oh, they took you as a real threat.
Because I gotta knock on more doors, anyhow, that's very important, and it can be crucial in winning or losing an election sometimes. I just think it's very important that be disclosed very, very quickly after expenditures are made.
I do too, and I think it's probably from my experiences again.
Sorry to be language person.
No,
I can't shut that part of my brain off. And I have more to do, but I'm just while we're still in the IE, I noticed, the paragraph G on page 7. Right above what we were just talking about, that starts with if a person wishes to distribute a specific communication. And I noticed that the language, as proposed, or the change would be to delete is not intended to influence, and add does not have a purpose of influencing. And I guess I would just suggest, food for thought, is that the language can consistently be consistent, so the language that we're changing it to incur with the purpose of or have the effect of. And I appreciate that G is ahead of time, but I still think it should be consistent. So I guess I'm suggesting that this language be changed to, and the person believes that the communication does not have a purpose of influencing or will not have the effect of. Because again, the person can just say,
Yeah.
this is not my purpose.
That's a good catch.
So
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
I do too.
and there may be other spots that's in there. I noticed on some paragraph C
And H,
and H, yeah, so I guess in all of the places where we talk about that.
Yep.
Let's just make that language.
because that, yeah. Having the effect of is very important, I think.
All right, and if we're gonna get way into the details, in that paragraph C, about 3/4 of the way down, we're referring to, made in accordance with the filing schedule in subsections 3A and 3B. And 3A doesn't exist anymore.
Thank you. Thank you.
Statutes like a bad choose your own adventure now.
Yes, exactly. All right, any other thoughts or exclamations of frustration or?
No, we appreciate all the detailed thinking and we'll do our best to come up with something. And,
I'm at your service.
well, I'll definitely take advantage of that. If others want to be involved, then you get into concerns about conducting business outside of our meeting. But
That's
if
correct.
I'm dealing with, I believe I'm correct in saying if I'm dealing with commissioners
Yeah.
one-on-one, then that concern is not raised.
Right,
So,
right. Okay,
That will, thank you.
have we had enough?
For now, yes.
Anybody want to make a magical motion? Is there a second? Second. That's not debatable, so we'll move right on to a vote. Commissioner Leclerc,
Yes,
Commissioner Hastings.
Yes.
Yeah. Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you for all your help. Thank you for your patience with us.
Before we disperse, can we confirm the next meeting dates? If we know that, maybe there's a.
I do have the next one memorized. It's October 25th.
I apologize for ruining the September day.
Oh, no problem.